Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of the Youth Roundtable, airing to you on Civic Space TV and brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. My name is Douglas Onen. I am your host or moderator for today's conversation. Just as I give you a preamble to what we're discussing, as per the constitutional mandate under Article 155(1) of the Constitution, Honorable Minister of Finance, Honorable Matthias Kasaija, presented to Parliament and Ugandans the budget for the financial year 2025-2026 that was approved by Parliament on 12th of June with a total of 72.4 trillion Ugandan shillings as a total for the financial year budget 2025-2026. And today we are having a youth perspective or a youth view on the national budget. But also very interestingly, on the international scene, we are also going to talk about the Israel-Iranian conflict that has, of course, made the world come to a standstill to possibly think whether we are headed in the right direction. And joining me to discuss this very interesting but robust topics is a panel of distinguished ladies and gentlemen who will help us unpack the conversation and put perspective to the topic. But in no particular order, I'll introduce my guests, but also give them a chance to say hello. Then we get straight to the conversation. I'll start from my extreme right. Our gentleman who has been hosting this show and of course a very usual face on the Youth Roundtable, Mr. Masawi Ayebare. You're most welcome.
I'm privileged to be on your extreme left. My name is Masawi.
You're oftentimes on this side.
Yes. I do appreciate you, Drake, for hosting us today. Yeah, I look forward to having a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right next to Masawi Ayebare, we are joined by an author, Kwesiga Emmanuel. You're most welcome.
Thank you, Drake. I am very privileged to be here.
Thank you. Very happy to have you here. The only lady on the show, but also a person that we have seen on various international forums. She has very critical views on issues of international peace and security, but also on climate change. But most importantly, she's someone who goes by very many titles. I wouldn't want to go into the nitty-gritties, but I'll just say Miss Ayebare Denise. You're most welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And since I'm not either on your far right or far left, I hope my views do not become extreme to the other side.
Thank you. Thank you. Last but not least, we are joined by, of course, what Masawi was referring to earlier before we started the show, the only economist on the show. Senior economist.
Our senior.
Yes, our senior on the topic that we are going to start with. Mr. Laban, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'd taken long without visiting this room.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the moderator maybe for remembering me.
You always remember.
After some months,
yeah,
that maybe I have something to contribute to this show. Thank you.
Thank you. You always have something to offer to this show. And I'm going to begin with you for that matter, therefore. This year's theme, is as it reads, it's on full monetization of the Uganda economy through commercial agriculture, industrialization, expanding and broadening services, digital transformation, and market access. Of course, this theme emanates from, we have a total budget of 72.4 trillion Ugandan shillings, but also as the Honorable Minister Matthias Kasaija segmented his speech, it focused on 4 key areas. The first was looking at accountability on the performance of the commitments made by the NRM government for the first half of Uganda Vision 2040. The second key segment in his speech was focusing on the performance of the economy and outlook. The third area that he focused on was on an account to the people of Uganda on the commitment that government made for the financial year 2024-2025 that is coming to an end in a few days, and priority areas of the budget for the financial year 2025-2026. And lastly, financing strategy for financial year 2025-2026 budget. Before we go into the nitty-gritties of these segmented areas in the budget, I just want you, because you're someone who has a robust knowledge on, of course, issues of economics, but also the budget. Give us an outlook or a picture that you think this budget, did it answer your expectations? Is there something lacking? What is your view?
I would say that our resource envelope for the financial year 2025-2026. In some way it answered my expectations, in the other way it didn't. And this is in the following aspects. My attention mostly was because I am passionate about education, mostly access to quality education. So when I look at education, I am happy that the government of Uganda has maintained the financing of the loans to students, mostly in high institutions of learning. Remember, I think like it is like back in
2023, 2024.
Yeah, because the government didn't lacked funds to finance that, and many young people were not able to join the university because they didn't have the money. So I am happy that the government has not only maintained the funding, but also it has maintained the money for scholarships. So that's why I am happy with the funding. When you look at also the construction of city schools, I think in this financial year, this coming financial year, they are going to construct more, I think around 116 city schools, secondary schools across different districts in Uganda. That is very special about it. Though I have an issue with the government. Sometimes they put it in the budget, but they fail to implement. Because I remember, I think the other year, even despite the government having money to construct such, they were not able in time to start the construction because of the issues ranging from the land. The government had not secured land titles where those construction could take place. So really that was indeed, it wasn't implemented, but I thank that that budget is there to maintain that. Then when you look at health, because me, I'm so much health, education, and other things. When you look at health, I'm happy that, of course, they are trying to operationalize something in the hospitals, construction, but I didn't see the government mention the issue of medical interns. The minister did not mention anywhere such things. I saw they are going to deploy more community-based medical specialists and personnel. But the medical interns, I didn't see them being made. But these are guys who graduated. Some of them graduated, for example, at Makerere University. People graduated in January. Up to now, they haven't been deployed. Of course, we hope that this financial year, mostly maybe in the first quarter of this financial year, which starts on 1st July, the government should allocate the money. But I didn't. Anyway, maybe I needed to pay attention because I didn't see the minister mentioning that. Then also when we go into social protection, I looked at the government also extending money, the youth livelihood program. That is my interest as a youth leader. Yeah, the government has provided that money. It is there, but the problem I have is that even up to now, the money, even last year it was there, but disbursement is the problem. For example, when I look, actually I think it is like 2 days, our chairperson of the National Youth Council was writing to the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Gender how the money had not, and we are just few days to the closure of the financial year, but the money up to now, majority of the districts have not received the money in the past. So sometimes you look at that budget, it looks impressive on the paper, but when it comes to implementation is a problem. Where I was not happy with the budget is that when you look at the budget, 72 as you have stated earlier, you look at 37, that is the money we expect from the domestic revenue, around 37 something. Yes. But now, 33, we're expecting it from tax revenue. That is the money collected by URA. Then we have around non-tax revenue, that is, for example, fees, for example, from URSB and other agencies, that is around 3 point something trillion. Then we
Grants.
have around, I think, around 300 something billion that we expect from local government revenue. That is the money that local government, that is districts and municipalities and town council, the money they collect. But now we have to note that when we compare the financial year 2024-2025, you look at the government borrowing for this coming financial year, it is going to increase from almost 8 to 11 trillion. What does it mean? It is going to overcrowd the public sector. That means we don't have the money to borrow, because that money government is going to borrow is not going to, sometimes it's not going to come to an individual like Emmanuel or Denise, our diplomat. It is likely to go to commercial banks. What does it mean? That it reduces the money that the private individual, the private sector would get, because this private sector is well off getting the money, lending money to government than an individual, because she is sure of the return the government will pay.
The risk management.
Are you getting? The risk attached. It is what? For the government, they are very okay. So the government, the banks will earn, so that leaves the little money available for the private sector. So we shall get the challenge in the production. So I expected that. Then other things I want to echo mostly maybe on the side of the tax amendments. I saw the government. Also, what I want to appreciate the government is that they came up with the tax amendment where they extended the tax holidays. That is, they would be exempting the startups for the 3 financial years. So that was very fantastic, because when you look at the startups, young people who are engaged in online business, you start your own company, you will not be, that means you will not be paying income tax. Let's assume Denise here, you start up an online company that is in marketing and something. Let's assume you make 50 million at the end of the financial year's profit. That money is supposed to be taxed 30% of the what? Because if you make 50, that means 30% of that may be around 15 million. So that money will not be taxed. It will gain, because now you need it to invest it. So it is going to stimulate our what? So I encourage young people mostly who are in, because most of these businesses, which are mostly startups, are for the young people. They are the ones starting this business. So I believe that exemption was very fantastic, and I want to appreciate mostly the executive committee of the National Youth Council. I don't usually appreciate them, but they pushed with the youth MPs like the Boniface Okot, the Jamutoros, and the rest. The Parliamentary Forum on Youth Affairs, they pushed to make sure that this bill is passed. Then lastly, maybe I would conclude by also appreciating the government. This time around, I'm appreciating the government. I don't usually. But of course, I'm also against it somewhere. The last, what I want to say, also the government and the Parliament of Uganda also made some good things in this coming financial. They have also extended the tax waiver for mostly on interests and penalties. If, for example, you pay principal, if, for example, your company, they are demanding it 16 million, but maybe because of the delay you have been delaying to pay, there are some penalties and interest that accrue, that you are supposed to pay. Because when you delay, they are supposed to charge you those penalties and interests on the principal tax. So the government has extended. If you pay before 31st of 2025, December 2025, that means they will waive away the penalties and interest. You will not pay them. Let's assume the penalty is of 8 million, but then the principal tax is 16 million. That means if you pay the 16 million, the 8 will not be charged, they will be waived off if you apply.
Okay.
So that is very fantastic because it will help the business to continue in operation.
Right.
Thank you
So,
so much.
it from your entire submission this time around, you want to applaud the government for the significant strides they've made towards, of course, the tax exemptions. You made submission.
Yeah, somewhere I want to applaud them, but somewhere because look at the security budget. Why would surely prioritize the security more than
We shall
our health? The security was given around, I think, 9.9, I think, trillion. Compared to health, where they are giving it 5. So, do we prioritize the security than health? What should we put at the forefront?
All right, we shall get to that. Ivan, of course, at this point, I just want to understand and also get your thoughts on did the budget that was read by the Honorable Matthias Kasaija meet your expectations?
Before I go to my expectations, I think ever since 2023-2024 financial year, we skyrocketed from a budget of 57.4 trillion to a budget envelope now that we always read that is around 72 trillion. It means we grew by over 14 trillion shillings. In terms of realistic growth, it is something to be proud of because there was a ambition, too much appetite, there was more appetite. So the issue should be the input to that appetite. So when you look at the current budget of 72.376 billion shillings, and you break it down that we still have a wage bill to pay staff of around 8.57 trillion. We have a non-recurrent expenditure of paying institutions, ministries of 28 trillion. We have development infrastructure, 18 trillion. Domestic debt financing of 10 trillion. Domestic amortization and the like still taking a high score. Where you come into conclusion is that what innovation or what gaps is this current budget addressing that the previous budget didn't address? This government has got a key challenge with the word efficiency. They do a lot of things ceremonially, is where you would see the finance minister, money has come, it is a joke, it is casual. When you look at, for example, the innovations that he points out, I've been here in Uganda, I've not arrived today for a show. Very many people have been pushed into registering TIN numbers, into registering for tax incentives. But even if they were given or not given, people have NIN numbers, but the businesses they are doing can't afford tax. Right? We just have, you look at innovations of expanding tax registers, but people have nowhere they are making this money that they are aimed to contribute in terms of their domestic revenue targets. So when you come and ask me my expectations, first, it is in good spirit as any citizen of a country to appreciate those who are planning. I may appreciate them for fulfilling their responsibility, but also maybe seeing that the budget is growing in terms of figures. You know, a budget is not a lie. People need to feel it. As long as you see border men on the street are not discussing the budget, it means there is nothing for them. You're in a taxi or in a WhatsApp group, people are not discussing. Laban has discussed the budget because he has seen what is in it. For him, loan scheme is back. He has been an education activist. He prides in seeing that human capital development, the 11 billion, is something that he wants to see. But again, when you ask him the budget declaration, how much percentage should government budget for such institutions? It is a complete mess. So the whole issue that we would require government honesty is, as it learns to prioritize its budgeting, we see that the minister said in STEM, that is science, technology, engineering and math, there is 890 billion shillings. but when you're giving it to the UPDF, Engineering Brigade, what does UPDF connect with things related to education, right? So when you look at even the budgets, for example, education, once you are not solving issues of efficiency and effectiveness, that you still have 8 million learners in the many schools that you promised to build, but only get 1 million reach P7. You still have 7 million learners drop out. Museveni is lucky they are not his direct grandchildren. They are for his supporters. I wish Moses' child also dropped out in P3 and we met 20 years later. So if you still have that culture, that you will have a very big budget of education of 5 trillion shillings, but it is for creating more commissioners. We are expanding more buildings, but in the little we are not addressing effectiveness. We have our when there is always a budget evaluation in the budget cycle prior to this reading. When you look at some of the references given to the ministry in terms of seeing that the gaps of, because in the global world we are living at, we need to minimize a lot of wastage and put our efficiency high. As long as now you see in this budget, you have had people analyze it everywhere. This anyone analyzing agriculture, it was shadowed by a certain scam called PDM. But when you look at the 1.09 trillion for PDM, what money pays people who supervise the project, and the 1 million they give at people at the village level. How many people you first address the gap? If indeed what we gave them in the last financial year was growing, at least now we should be developing an innovation to see that we create a sustainable environment for already those we invested in, to see that the fund can be sustainable. But if you are investing in the project in its second year, just like a startup, PDM's investment is as if it is starting this year, but this is something you're now financing to see that you create more avenues for sustainability. So the more we budget with a political mindset, I need to appease my people, we need to say money has come, we need to create comedy in the budget speech, we need to have 10 trillion for legislation, that is parliament. This country needs 10 trillion shillings for legislation. Then at the end of the year, they will tell us 10 trillion shillings has been stolen, wasted to corruption. Where does that money come from? Because even when you see that, like he has clearly put it right, when government chooses the alternative of domestic borrowing, it disadvantages the local man who wants to compete in terms of financing. Also to government, it is a good attitude, because lately we are being limited borrowing outside because of our position on some national laws and maybe our position on how we do our affairs. Borrowing within has an advantage that if I'm borrowing from Centenary, who is a local bank, Centenary will grow because it will charge me high interest rate, but Centenary will grow as Centenary, not Ugandans. A Ugandan chairman who owns Centenary, they will grow because they have less risk in the loan and the return is high. The Centenary doesn't loan like Exim Bank. Their interest may be 4%, yet abroad you're getting a loan at 1%. So generally, but now a local man who goes to Centenary will find there is no credit, like he puts it. So whenever you reduce government, you begin to act like Masawi Ivan. You want to borrow in people the way I borrow. You also want to line up in the line and borrow like me. You show that the reasons you're priding in your growth are more of ego. So in my conclusion, expectations on paper we are still doing well, but we are not. We are having recurrent inefficiencies, recurrent ineffectiveness in implementation, because you can't say we have an infrastructure development of 10 trillion, but me who goes to Mbale from Kampala just to reach Jinja, the Mabira road is horrible. We merged the ministries, thinking we are going to remain with a lot of money. Our coffee went, we merged the Ministry of Youth, we are no longer. But where did these merger monies go? because we merged the ministries to see that we have more resources.
All right.
But the budget has not grown. When we had these institutions, it was 72 trillion. We have merged them, it is still 72 trillion. Where has the money gone?
Okay. Thank you very much, Masawi, for that analysis, but also giving us your expectations. We shall get into the nitty-gritties. Let me come to you, Emmanuel. What are your expectations, man?
Thank you so much. Just for purposes of laying and making a base for my personal discussion in response to your question, is that in the writings of Karl Marx, who clearly states, and he does what he calls the base and superstructure metaphor, and without going deep into its nitty-gritties, but he suggests or he opines that the economics is at the bottom, and anything that affects the bottom, of course, does affect the top. And I believe that is true. Oftentimes I've come here and disagreed with him and made my opinion that politics is at the bottom, but in this case, I now agree with him. My opinion has changed. So economics, and definitely when we discuss the budget in implied terms, we discuss economics. And the budget we are here to discuss is not a phantom. It does exist in reality. Now, still back to economics. We have what we call the fundamental problems of economics. And that is scarcity, that is the choice, that is opportunity cost. Now, by nature, resources are scarce. In fact, even time. Just every resource is very scarce. Because that is the case, you as an individual, you as government, you as an entity, you have to make a choice that you have so many wants and needs that you have on your budget. You as an individual, for example, there is a lot you need to purchase or you need to have. But there is what we call the important and urgent, and the important and not urgent. So you have to draw a list. That is called, I think, scale of preferences, how you prioritize that you need. And the same applies to a country, that because we have limited resources, had that not been the case, then, for example, we wouldn't have to borrow. But we borrow because the resources, and in this instance, being the money, is scarce. Meaning that we have to have a scale of preferences, so we have to make a choice. And as you make a choice, you eventually come to what is called the opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost is the next best alternative for a goal when choice is made. The question to you then is, where are our priorities as a country? For me, the question, the rhetorical question lies right there. That yes, we need security as a country. Yes, we need electricity. Yes, we need health. Yes, we need infrastructure, the roads. Yes, we need to invest in our strongest competitive advantage, that being agriculture. But then, what is most important? That we have 10 items that we need to have and are important to us as a country. How do we rank them? That forms the question of how much money do you allocate to what in the budget. I hope that makes sense. But now to your question, question of how satisfied am I with the budget. First of all, just like Katpo, today I have credit to give to this government. And this is in given instances. One, they highlighted the fact that there has been improved life expectancy. That I have no opinion to give, because how do I tell that? But there are things that I am able to make analysis of with my personal experience and the environment we live in. These include health and education. There has been relatively some sort of improvement. I now want to keep a blind eye to what happens in our national rural hospitals, which has been the case, the stories today, but relatively from my personal experience and given the fact that I have a local background, there seems to be more infrastructure.
We are all local, apart from her.
being established and set up. The question of whether they are financed enough, whether they have the medical personnel, whether they have enough medicine, is a question for another day. But the fact that these structures are being put up, then we have hope that maybe a lot can happen. Then installed electricity. Honestly speaking, we all might agree on this point that slow as the pace could have been, but there seems to be continuous extension of electricity to different parts of the country, including the rural setting. I come from the center. I'm from Zimbabwe, but most of the villages, including my own trading center, Mitima, we now have electricity, and for me, that's yes, I am very soon I will be a cool citizen because I didn't have the privilege of being a cool kid, but I will be a cool man maybe. So I think I give credit to that. Then about internet connectivity increased, they highlighted that in the budget, and I think that we
But
do
the cost
agree.
is something we shall look at.
Yes, that's another discussion. Then economic diversification from the 3 C's and 3 T's, that I agree. We seem to have a multiple set of that we trade in and benefit from as a country. So I have sort of my personal satisfactions from the budget that we have.
All right, thank you. Denise, were your expectations met?
Well, thank you so much, Drake. And I'm just going to build context on what everyone has said. I think it was such a rich discussion. But I think I'm the first one to say I'm still disappointed by the government. And I think that's where I'm going to differ from Laban and Emmanuel. I didn't know Masawi. He was in the middle, amidst being disappointed and not being disappointed by the government. I'm going to make my stance very clear that it's still a disappointment. When you look at the budget itself, you're going to look at the biggest budget that we have. A significant portion of it is going to go to debt servicing and the debt that we have continuously had. And when you look at debt servicing, this plays into the taxes or the tax exemptions that Laban was talking about, as well as Masawi. You see, for a country to bring about those tax exemptions, they must be able to analyze how this is going to affect the citizens, or how those exemptions are going to sort of bring profits in the long run. But if they are rushed to that extent, because you see, the budget has been read on a backdrop where external financing has been reduced in the previous years. And this could be probably because of the 2023 anti-homosexuality bill that we passed. It could be probably because of the USAID cut, every dollar for every American. And you look at all these things, that is where we are having our budget being read from. And yet half of the budget still looks at grants, it looks at loans, but then it also looks at external resources like oil. And I'm going to give an analysis about how such also does not play into maybe how our future is supposed to look like. When you look at things like oil, these are resources, and there is a paradox of having plenty, just like Emmanuel has said. When you look at these resources, you do not check about how it is going to interact with the global economies. If there is a backdrop maybe in the oil prices, or if there is a surge, how it is going to plunge more people into poverty. And you see, these are things that take us back into dealing with multinational corporations. It takes us back into things like neocolonialism. It doesn't give us the autonomy to deal with ourselves the way we would want to deal with ourselves and say agriculture, or even when we are diversifying the economy to this extent. But then the second thing I'm going to talk about, you see, Masawi in his submission talked about the Abuja Declaration and maybe the Dakar framework, all these. You see, our budget does not meet any of the continental frameworks or declarations that we have to that extent. You see, Laban says that he's so passionate about education, but the budget of education does not even meet the 15% that Abuja Declaration talks about. When you go to health, as a continent, we are supposed to have our budget at least 20%, meet with the Dakar framework that was passed as the African Union and all that. But to that extent, our budget doesn't even meet 8% of that, or it doesn't even meet a quarter of the 20% that we're supposed to have our continental commitments to. But also that aside, you're going to look at things like how it is going to play into our politics and power dynamics. Everyone has talked about what we have: corruption, how we interact with power dynamics, how we interact with our institutions, because we can all agree that our system is shackled. We are having systemic failures within the system, and to get them out, that also speaks to implementation. And now we're going to talk about the local government that acts as the implementing partner. For the past 5 years, you've continuously had the budget of the local government stagnant, and this time round, it has actually been reduced. And when you look at the reduction in the local government's budget, yet they are your implementing partners. They are your decentralized They're a decentralized arm that is supposed to
They are the real state.
Exactly. Health, education, you're reducing their ability to sort of implement any of these policies that you're bringing in. So what you do, you're exacerbating the inefficiency, but you're going ahead and ensuring that you do not have any implementation of what you're talking about, like MET or anything. I think it all plays into how we can be efficient, how we can implement even the budget, the small budget that we have. But then going also to the tax exemptions, I think they're good on paper and they sound very great. But you go downwards and you look at individuals, because you see our budget, when Matia Kasaija was reading it, they're planning to carry out aggressive domestic revenue collection. And that means they're going to aggressively tax a Ugandan. But how many people in Uganda actually are within businesses that can be taxed, or they are going to plunge these individuals more into poverty? Because 20% still live below the poverty line. So meaning you're left with probably, let's say, 40 that are within the working class and all that you're going to tax. Businesses, most of them are owned by, you know, the likes of the people who own businesses in Uganda. And those people sometimes are exempted from these taxes. I think when Laban talks about individuals, like people beginning businesses and all that, you're going to look at things like agriculture, but look at the budget of agriculture that we are having right now. Look at, do we have the digital tools to start up things like e-commerce? Do we have the ability, or do we even have the money, the circulation of the money in the economy to be able to start up that businesses to an extent of sustaining them? Or we're just going to still tax that same money or whatnot, and we're going to be met exactly with the same failures we always have.
Interesting.
Maybe I would like to chip in. Shortly. I do agree with her that sometimes people who are supposed to pay huge taxes end up not paying. But you see, I believe even when the government's strategy to increase revenue, it should not be about increasing the revenues. Because when you look even what the taxes they are increasing, it should be about laying strategy in improving, for example, the ICT infrastructure, in making sure that the businesses have the systems. If, for example, business do not have the machines of IFRIS to do e-receipting, how do you make sure that the government provides those machines? The way, for example, banks give those systems to their client, so that they but also they should, the URA has to lay the strategy on how, because there are so many businesses which are supposed to be taxed, but they end up not being what? That's so many. Actually, majority of the people in Uganda are evade tax. Majority of the people. I am a tax consultant. That is the work I do daily. I can tell you that people who are supposed to pay taxes do not pay taxes. It is the role of the government to make sure that they add more money power to URA. You see people even fail to go and enforce people to pay tax.
Excuse me, Laban. You see, you raise an argument that the people that were supposed to pay these taxes are not paying these taxes. Do you give Ugandans the incentive to pay the taxes?
But I've told you here, I've told you the startup. For example, if you start a farm in Iguru today, and you have started, you make your profits of 50 million in the first year at the end of the next financial year. The government has come and has said, those profits you have made, you will not pay tax. Are you getting? You reinvest for the more 3 what? Yes, they have given us those incentives. I think but just that maybe the Ugandans, also the government, do not disperse the information to the people who own this business so that they can take advantages of these exemptions.
Okay. Kwesiga had something, then I'll come to Masawi, because I have a question for you.
I just wanted in the very...
Okay, you can respond to that.
You know, Laban presents a very good scenario, but the whole case here is even when there are incentives, do you have ability to produce revenue to pay tax? When you say you're waving away for startups, how many youths have the ability to even start a startup? Meeting the required regulations, PPDA, you URSB registered, you have a TIN number, you have an office, you have an address. So the whole issue about our innovation should be that government should get more people to an environment where they can. Taxes have never been bad because they are for our own interests as a country. For those who don't pay them, they are evil, because even in the Bible they were tax collectors. Jesus hired some of them for his purposes of mission. I embrace all young people. Taxes are good, but the ability for you to generate the revenue to pay tax. I have been involved in a startup. Even if they told you you're not paying taxes, once your startup has never reached an age of producing money, it is an useless incentive to you.
There is something I want to clarify. You see, with the taxes, if you have not worked, you don't pay tax. Let me give you an example. Today, if you start a business, and you don't the whole year, you don't get clients, you are not supposed to pay tax. For you just go, it is very easy. Declare, do voluntary disclosure, and don't declare that you have not worked. And there is no way URA is going to do what? To come and tax you. The people, just me, the problem where I see is that the URA sometimes and the government do not do its work to educate their people. There is tax education is very low.
But but in the budget they allocated quite significant amount to give to URA to educate Ugandans on.
Yes, but sometimes they don't, and the manpower is a problem. URA, do you know that URA was in a shortfall? They spent almost 5 months that they in shortfall of the people left, but they couldn't replace people. Almost more than 1,000.
And why are people leaving URA then?
Yes, they are going for
Why do you hire a human resource officer who can't plan such?
No, other people go, they go, but just
inefficiencies are not
in any organization, people go, but how do you replace them? It is the weakness of the government that sometimes they don't provide funds for hiring that manpower on time. But what I would say is
people who are going to collect money.
Ugandans, what we should do is, what we should know is, you only pay tax when you have worked. If you have not worked, you don't pay, because voluntary disclosure is very clear.
Okay. All right. Emmanuel had something to say, then I can engage Masawi.
Thank you, Drake. Now, I want to, first of all, credit all these people for their submissions. They raise a very important point, and all I come in to do now is not to disagree, but rather to build on the same. Now, those of you that studied some bit of economics, when it comes to profit making, there are two ways through which you make profits. One is profit maximization. The other one is sales maximization. Profit maximization focuses on how much money do you get off each commodity you sell, off each product, off each service you offer. But then sales maximization looks at how many people do you sell to. In other words, I might want to get 1,000 shillings off every book I sell, but another one might want to do sales maximization, getting 100 shillings off every book they sell. Meaning that this person is going to sell to 10 people to get 1,000 shillings. But in the long run, it might be true that you will sell one book a day, and because I am aiming at sales maximization, I might make 2,000 a day. Meaning that in the long run, I'm making more money than you do. Now, bringing that to context, I want each one of us to ask ourselves, which of those two dynamics does the government seem to employ in tax collection? In my humble opinion, it seems to go by the former, and that is profit maximization. What I mean here is that few people pay taxes, and yet government has a set standard, has a given figure of amounts it intends to collect from the businesses, to collect internally, for example, so to say. So then, the focus is on who earns much. So, you have, say, a given, say 1 million people, Ugandans, paying, and all the tax load is onto them, they have to cover that. What if the option then was to restructure the taxation systems to make sure that now you have even the little income earners, you have so many unregistered businesses in this country. Right when we get out of this room, I want us to be keen and observant. How many businesses will you walk past in just 1 kilometer walk of unregistered businesses? People making money, but they are not paying taxes. Then you have a person in a shop who is paying high taxes, and the person going by usufructual rights, who is just in front of them, say chapati and a stall of things, after which they pack and keep elsewhere in the evening, is making more money. But this one here is being subject to so much tax. Don't you think this person loses morale and the incentive for which they should be paying the taxes? I do understand that taxes are a non-quid pro quo payment. That's the right word, non-quid pro quo payment. That it is not a must that you will get the same value for what you expect. You do not demand the equivalent of any statistics.
Yeah.
But then I should be able to see that in as much as it doesn't reflect, well, at least if I've been in this particular area for a year, this road is being worked on. That we had, for example, one pharmacy, one important and big pharmacy in the neighborhood. We now have 3. Now I can see value for money. But then when there seems to be no correlation between the taxes people pay and the services they get, other factors constant, ceteris paribus, then I think we have a big problem. So the solution then is government should reconsider the position, the number of people they target to collect the taxes. It should not fall on one entity, on one company, because it is earning in billions. But because then it is also going to lose morale. If it's supposed to ideally make profits and invest more, then you actually, literally, it's working for taxes, and it doesn't seem to be left with much of its profits at its exposure for further doings. And yet you have a person who has done a small business, unregistered, untaxed, and they are now big money makers. I am from the village. We have so many unregistered businesses. We are cattle keepers, but you can sell 100 cattle in one day and no tax. I understand there is indirect tax that you pay as you buy the carry sides and everything, but there is no direct tax on this, and yet I am earning. And all that I'm supposed to be paying is falling on another person that I do not know. So I think there is equally a loophole in that regard.
Right.
I do not know what my seniors have to say, but honestly, that is my take.
Okay, so at this point, I wanted to switch the conversation from the aspect of revenue collection, because there seems to be a critical debate there. But now let's go into the nitty-gritties of the budget itself. And that's why I want to bring in Masawi. As I earlier on started, the budget was segmented into 4 parts. Of course, the first part was looking at the accountability of the performance of the commitment made by the NRM government for the first half of the Uganda Vision 2040. But let me just give context to that. The first half of the Uganda Vision 2040 started in 2010 with the implementation of the first 5-year National Development Plan. And thereafter, the National Development Plan 2, and then we had National Development Plan 3, which ends in this financial year. So the initial years of the NRM government before 2010, the government was dedicated to restoring sustainable peace, recovering and establishing a broken economy, addressing extreme poverty, and implementing reforms that liberated the economy and created the environment for the private sector to flourish. Under here, the Honorable Minister articulates approximately 12 items that the achievements. The first achievement is, of course, peace and security. The economy has tripled to shillings 226.3 trillion, equivalent to 61 billion US dollars in the financial year 2024-2025, from 64.8 trillion that was in the financial year 2010-2011. Significant progress. It talks about the life expectancy going high, the population living within a 5-kilometer radius from a health facility, among other achievements. But the reason why I want us to give this account is to, has the government achieved its national development plan that they want to move towards the Vision 2040? From these achievements, it shows that they are almost achieving that. They've tried to increase the life expectancy of people. They've gone ahead and installed electricity generation capacity. They have also tried to reduce poverty, among other reasons. But Masawi, I know you hold a seemingly opposite view to this, but let's hear your thoughts on that.
Drake, thank you very much. As we concluded on revenue, I wanted my colleagues to go and check URA's target revenue for financial year 2023-2024 or 2024-2025.
It was around 29.
What was their target? We are remaining with 12 days to close the financial year. How much have they raised? Coming to your question.
But they have improved. Eh?
No, just check the figures that how much have they raised. 12 days
the target is around 28.
get the latest and get to know what were they supposed to contribute to 72 trillion. Because you can't say you have 72 trillion and you're only collecting 28 trillion. Do the math and see the subtraction. If it does create any effective budgeting, or whether in resource or allocation. So, coming back to your question, Drake, a budget stipulates with goals. Intended goals. We had an old man here in an election promised to secure the future, right? It means part of the budget when he is in power is to secure the future of Ugandans. As a ruling government, you use a budget to. We should not discuss a budget that there is a national planning authority. They will do a Simayeni plan 1, 2, 3. There is also a serving government that was given a mandate by Ugandans. It had the manifesto that it promised.
You always say that it was not given by Uganda, they stole it.
Okay.
The mandate was hijacked.
If someone stole and you were sworn in, what will you do?
Don't you?
No, the one who is sworn in has been given, and the person who gave him is a Ugandan. Winnie was not brought from the moon, it came from Acholi. So, coming back to your question, first of all, when you look at the theme of the budget, you look at the congestion, too many words. Whenever you see someone who talks too many words, is either a politician or has nothing much to offer. Because you can't have a theme of more than 10 words. Words all over the place. What is that is hard to be very objective and very clear in a few words? Part of the challenge the NRM government has had is trying to do too many things at the same time for purposes of impressing people instead of effective implementation. Whenever you see you're going towards an election, you want to do a lot of things for purposes of impression. You will grow, but you will grow in a circular growth.
Do you know about what is called the balanced growth strategy?
I will come to that.
If that's what they want to employ.
That is from where you sit, you find that is what they want to employ. But for me, where maybe I am, is that certain things, for example, were made to happen, even if it was a different government, even if there was no Ugandans, if this is where the world was going, there would be Ugandans who live luxuriously the way some Ugandans live. There would be Ugandans still having certain attributes, whether it was Museveni or not, whether there was the instability. Where the world is going, you can never say we shall not go there because we are not ready. We are supposed to be here if God had made it. There are certain things we are over giving government that without them, Ugandans maybe motorcycles. Even we cannot say other governments who would have been here would be poor performers because we have seen one leader for 40 years. Right? So, coming back to your question of the accountability part, the whole issue is when you say you had the National Development Plan 3 and it is ending in this year, and you find the areas in terms of work, revenues, expenditures justify. Because when we see our budgets, there are areas in our budgets where we should be sustaining, but not starting as if we started this financial year to work on something. Like he did point out on education. The most dangerous issues Ugandans are having, they don't want to read. Spare your time and break down into each of these budgets. Individually get a budget like health breakdown and see where are they spending the 5 something trillion shillings. Expenditures, what, conferences, you will not see that they are innovating a lot of, maybe there will be a small expansion of health center fees, health center force, but you build a structure which you can't give medicine. You can't employ nurses in time. You build a structure that can't reduce the levels of people going for referral. The whole issue of this is why I come to her issue of local governments. As long as we budget and make local governments look malnourished, because how do you explain to a Kenyan or a Tanzanian that our local governments only get 368 billion shillings is what they collect the national cake? The national, because the local government has markets, There should be licenses in those districts, everybody running a shop. We have 146 districts for purposes of your information. In those 146 are around 9 cities, or 10 cities, and then you take out the rest, 130 districts, which should be raising money, and they can only afford to raise 368 billion. Money which Sudira as a person may pay in a financial year to URA is money raised by the entire districts, including mine of Duda. And we are happy that our local governments are poor. When you look at the entire budget, 60% of it will stay here in Kampala. Those people in the village just get the news on radio. Budget is why when we started, you asked us our expectations. As long as we don't feel the budget, our expectations are in feeling. When we don't feel, it means literally we appreciate they are doing their civic responsibility. They are growing, maybe to according to them, they have convinced us there is growth, but when it doesn't touch me, because a country should be something where its budget reflects in the lives of the citizens in that country. But if the priorities in the budget are always very at the extreme end from where the citizens are, he has just received the electricity. Now, yet the Executive has been electing the current government in power since Sam Kutesa. Since Obote actually left, there has been Sam Kutesa and the group, the Sodos. But if a president's brother comes from a place that has just received the electricity, after Imeme has gone, and then you want to say we need to come here, but we have every financial year we pay 99 billion shillings for unused electricity. Zimbabwe has just received. But there is electricity we don't receive, we use, we need to pay for its maintenance and wastage for it to be diverted back.
Just as you conclude, and I would like to bring in Laban, because I want Laban to now handle the performance outlook. You're talking about electricity. We have looked at a couple of
I will talk about that because engineer, health and electricity are the things I understand best as a mechatronics and biomedical person. So the whole issue is, I will not leave my ground. Our inefficiencies in budgeting. When we go to an academia from mobs, we thought we have got someone is going to change a lot of these gaps. We saw a budget growing by 14 billion in one financial year from 57 point. We thought this 14 billion is into productivity. Our consumption has not reduced. People are still so consumptive. You find a budget where we are just budgeting salaries. We find a budget where we are as if we are doing promotion of one candidate for the next election. His family, his house, his tours for PDA. A budget where we spend on almost 1% of the population and the other 99 are just spectators.
Someone said that every budget, every financial year, it's like only spent within Kampala.
No, but the budget, to be honest, no. You have a budget reading there. Look at that money. Where is it going to remain? Ask me how much money is going to reach your village. Because the road, for example, in the entire budget, if you look at infrastructure, the road they have put there that is from Manafa to Buvule, one I know of 25 billion shillings, was promised by Museveni in 2005 during campaigns. I was at that polling that center when he came to campaign. It was promised in 2005. We are in 2025. It is still. It just came this year. I was at that rally when he promised it.
All right. Let me just stop you there. Laban, performance outlook. Honorable says inflation, of course, is going to still remain below 5%. He says Uganda's exchange rate has been among the most stable economies in Africa. He goes ahead and says, of course,
the price of purchasing capital
has also significantly improved. Then talks about tourism and foreign direct investment. They're going to inject a couple of trillions in there. Would like to pick your thoughts on our performance outlook.
Yeah, the performance has been quite relatively okay. Maybe in some extent, It has not been fine.
Yeah.
But you have talked about the inflation. I think the inflation has maintained. It's still mild. When you look at the last this last month of the final quarter of this financial year, we have not had inflation. When you look at our foreign exchange, the Ugandan shillings has gained more.
But
while I was reading,
excuse me, Laban. I just want us now to first try and realistically localize this conversation. If a Ugandan picked 10,000 today, let's how we feel, like how we use money. You pick 10,000 today.
Go buy sugar.
10,000 cannot
6K.
cannot get you more than 2 kilos of sugar. Is that the life? Because inflation for many Ugandans is going to be determined by the purchasing power they get from the money, not from the figures that we hear. So when the Honorable says it's below 5%, what does that mean? Because to an ordinary Ugandan, is the ability of their money to be in position to purchase.
Because
so you want
significantly.
You want to have money, for example, in Zimbabwe, where you just go and buy things. You see, inflation can be good or bad.
Depending on the value of your shilling.
That's why I said it is mild. There is no any country that doesn't have inflation. You don't expect prices to always be constant. Never. They will always be high. But to what extent are they increasing? That's what I meant. It is mild, it is maintained. The reason why it is being maintained is because of the appreciation of our shilling compared to the dollar.
The value of the shilling.
We're getting.
Yeah.
When you look at the global market, how is the performance of the Ugandan shilling? It has been very stable.
Yes.
I think it has
almost a decade actually.
Yes, actually when you look at this this quarter, the fourth quarter, I think it has appreciated by the percentage, I think around 4% on the global market. What does it mean? That you will not, for example, if you are importing, because you see, the inflation in Uganda is not only influenced by the local factors,
external factors.
The good thing we are going now to discuss the Iran and Israel war. You are going to see sometimes it's not controlled by Uganda. So there are external factors that control it. So, but also how our
actually, to be honest,
perform.
External factors control more than internal.
But also how our shillings will perform in the global market against the dollar. Also determine, because one thing, we need the dollar. So if the dollar is scarce here in Uganda, that means expect prices of goods to be very high. Because
so if I may ask you, as the Honorable always says, the economy is doing wonderfully. Is it doing wonderfully according to you?
According to me, as someone who has started in the class of economy, not once, the economy of Uganda is a bit make my statement, is a bit performing well.
Yeah, you just fight by how much money is.
Yes, we have, because it is performing well.
Yeah.
We are in this financial year, we have not had, because for example, we are just coming, it is like now 3 years when we are just coming from the COVID shocks. So you just have to understand, and you remember that also the World Bank has
regulations.
The decision to review Uganda's portfolio in terms of financing. It also affected us somewhere. For example, when it comes to projects that bring in money, when money is coming in Uganda, doesn't come in Ugandan shillings. It comes in dollar. What do you need the dollar to do? When you are importing goods, you don't use Ugandan shillings. You have to get the dollar. So when the dollar is scarce, that is how you see even the what? But the way I've said, Uganda's currency in the global market has continued to what? To improve. But the inflation within Uganda, the oil prices are not only determined by local factors. They are largely determined by
foreign factors,
external factors on how the USA is doing in the global market. What are the wars, everything. For example, we shall reach on the issue of Israel, and we shall see what is the economic implication of that war.
All right, Denise, And now at this point, I want us to look at two key sectors that I'd like you to expound upon. One, education, two, tourism. Education has significantly received, has received 5.04 trillion shillings, which is, of course, a boost to the education sector. We have seen the capitalization of the loan scheme, among others. One, with the amount of money that, the 5 trillion shillings that we have received and the plan that we see the government is planning, will, of course, delivery of quality education be achieved in this financial budget. But then two, as you were previously Miss Tourism, of course, the ministry, the ministry, the minister of finance has improved the sector by allocating a quite significant amount because that they want to improve the face of this country. What is your take on those two fronts?
Drake, I think two things. I'll just start by saying we are far away from achieving things like quality education when you look at the budget allocation in the next financial year. You see, to an extent that you do not prioritize the education system to see that individuals have access to simple things such as maybe teachers. You have access to things such as equipment. Yeah. You have things such as the laboratories being developed. You even have a new curriculum that now is based on skills that is based on any other.
Yeah, cheap things like pads.
Exactly. And how many people now cannot miss school girls because they do not have access to things like pads? Or how many people are not going to miss out on project work because they do not have access to equipment that is going to be used? When you look at the education allocation itself, the budget allocation, you're going to see that most of it is going to maybe the DEOs at the district level, the salaries still, the conferences, and you're talking about all these things. Yet individuals like where I come from still, you have even public schools do not have a functioning library. Even a library is such a big structure. You do not have books that are existing. Nowadays we used to have Gulugulu goes to school for free or anything. But those things even no longer exist to that extent where you do not have access to such free books. And this is an education system because I believe that the backdrop of any country is its education system. And this is what is going to continuously bring about the gap between the haves and the have-nots in the country, because you have individuals that can be able to access private schools, that can likely pay the 3 million tende, that can likely pay the millions of money to set a high school, any of the private schools that exist. And then there is that one person that is going to drop out even before they complete the P7, or they cannot even afford to go to even a UCE school that most of them that developed us, or UPE. The system itself has continuously failed. And then you have a president that is going to say that arts are not important, yet he himself studied political science. So you find it very questionable on how balanced then the education system becomes. Because if you have individuals that exist in STEM, then you need a balance in individuals that are going to exist within the arts world. Because these are individuals that make the policies, they're individuals that come up with all that. But you see, the division that we have continuously creates a country that is only going to be on one side, and then you're curtailing the minds, you're curtailing the individuals, the critics, the people that make the policies. And I think that is very problematic to that extent. Yeah. But then talking about that too, I just want to bring in an area that I'm very passionate before I go to, as I go to tourism, right? So you see, Uganda as a country, when you see it on the world map, it's the 12th that is affected by climate change. You see, it's the 12th most vulnerable country that is affected by climate change. And when you look at its readiness to deal with the climate change impacts, it's the 163rd. So meaning our ability to be able to curtail climate change impacts is also reduced. And you're having things like floods, you're having things like droughts that are always recurring. And these are individuals that are vulnerable. And that brings me to tourism. You see, to an
actually,
extent,
before you go to tourism, let's first, I want to, since of course you are you're very vocal on issues of climate change, under water sanitation and environmental protection, the government has provided an additional 366.1 billion, which is to provide safe water, sanitation and environmental protection. In your opinion, is that sufficient? Because considering that we are hitting almost the brink of a climate crisis in this country, is that sufficient really?
No, but the very government will give Chinese swamps to
So
construct.
exactly.
In Mbale, they constructed an industrial park in our swamp.
Masaka Road, you see the rice farms that are all there, the Chinese that are owned.
Yeah.
You see, this country has continuously faced a wash crisis, and I think it's one of the things we'd like to deal with. And I usually give this example that individuals that cannot walk to access water where they have national water within their compounds never know the pain of walking kilometers to access water that is even dirty from a swamp or even the well or borehole is not functioning at that time. Where you have sanitation now becoming, it's not even a priority because an individual has to forego certain things to be able to access water for cooking or anything. And this, you could talk about girls or anything and their menstrual hygiene. But that money itself, when you've cut the budget of climate change response, I think it's the government's inefficiency. Months ago, we had Kampala flooding, and this was not because of climate change. I think most people would like to blame climate change and use it as a scapegoat, but I don't think that was climate change.
Infrastructure planning.
Exactly. It was an infrastructure gap that was existing, maybe with KCCA, and you have the city flooding. That doesn't become climate change, and most of it we use it as a scapegoat to say, oh, we are having rainfall increase and all that. I mean, weather has never been an excuse for people not going to work in other developed countries. When you go to the UK, it snows and it does everything, or you go to other countries in Europe and anywhere. But you never have an excuse. It's only in Uganda where you have the beautiful weather that our finance minister is going to talk about, but then you have the city itself flooding and people not going to work, and we're using it as an excuse. And we are a country that wants to develop and compete with other people. Yeah. But then I think that wash money itself is not enough to deal with the climate crisis, because you see, it's not only wash, it's not just water and sanitation or anything else. It's a whole context of where you have Bududa is going to flood, the roads are going to burst, the banks are going to burst, health systems are not going to have any response that is there immediate. And then to that extent, are you going to use the wash budget, or you're going to use health facilities? You have roads, you have economies that are strapped, you have those small feeder roads where people are going to slide border, business is not going on. And that's the nature of what is existing right now. So even when they cut the budget for climate change responses, I don't think that wash money would be able to fill in for that, which I think is also good, but to that extent it doesn't fill in the gaps that exist.
Yeah, as you summarize now on tourism.
Yes, and that brings me to tourism. You see, we are a very funny country. We are increasing the money for tourism, yet the road that even leads to the tourist sites are not constructed. We are increasing the money for tourism and promoting any of that, yet itself, like, I'm going to give an example. You know, they have just worked on the Kanungu road, and you know how bad it was. I mean, for everyone that knew how bad it was. And that's where you access Mugahinga, that's where you access Bwindi, that's where you access any of the beautiful sceneries. Exactly, partly of it. And the roads themselves that take you there, you're going to spend much more time than getting there to see what you're supposed to see. By the time you're going to promote tourism, you can't even be able to see anything. The second thing, we're talking about tourism itself. I want to applaud them maybe for Uganda Airlines and promoting it and all that. But to an extent, as a country, what are we capitalizing on? What do we have to show, even to an extent that we're encroaching on national parks? To an extent that we are giving out any of the sites that we have to investors because we just want investment. It would be a good move if we provided incentive for tourists to come. And that incentive starts with things like roads, access to the tourist sites. But then the second thing, it also has to speak a lot to climate change and weather. How do we protect our biodiversity? The river forest is almost gone. When you look at Budongo forest and all the others, we are encroaching on them, and these are things that give us that environment to attract tourists. Exactly. So to that extent, I think we are putting money where we are not going to be able to gain from it. Because the best we are going to do is that the Ministry of Tourism is going to support Miss Tourism contestants, and then you're likely going to move around the region with Explore Uganda, and that's why it is going to stop. Because that's to the extent of what you can do, and you're not doing anything else to make sure that this country is being attractive. I'm going to give an example of Rwanda. Rwanda spends its money on jazzes, and it's going to say Visit Rwanda. And now they opened up a partnership with PSG where they have jazzes that have Visit Rwanda. To that extent, they're not stopping there doing that. They're developing their country. They're creating roads. They're creating sceneries.
they're becoming a peaceful country, and we can't follow suit because we are putting money somewhere and we're not going an extra mile to
But
ensure
Rwanda's
that
road network is so poor than that one of Uganda.
No, some places.
Really?
Yes. Most of the Rwanda's road network, the condition, when you look at it, they are so poor than that one of Uganda. So I also, yes.
There was on that
Yeah, but I'm telling you, that is the fact. Road network in Rwanda is poor.
Anyway,
because we have done.
Let's not discuss Rwandan politics because we
have our cameras. We are comparing. She needs to sort our cameras here.
Now, you see, to an extent that they have made their city very clean. If you're not a proud person to go and say, I'm going to Queen Elizabeth and document what I have seen as a country, then how do you expect someone from another foreign country to come?
Yeah.
And that's why even when you create Explore Uganda, it's likely maybe that these tourism queens that are going and the photographers, and you're likely going to think it was a big thing and no one is interested in touring Uganda.
Interesting. As you are summing up your argumentation, something funny just clicked into my mind. This is the same government that poured billions of shillings in trying to change Uganda's mindset on how to drink coffee. Let me get to you, Emmanuel, as we sum up this half of the show. Wealth creation programs. We have Emioga, we have PDM. You got, the minister said we are going ahead to capitalize Uganda Development Bank so that there is more access to credit for businesses, among others. Is that feasible? Is that going to be realistic? Is it going to be achieved?
Thank you. Now, for me, what we discussed today is not an event. The budget reading was an event. It was a ceremony. But how we arrived to that budget is not an event. It is instead a process.
The cycle, actually.
So, what you read that day, or what we have as a budget allocated to those programs, for example, what we have on paper that day is just ceremony, it is an event. The question then is, when you eventually give out this money, how effective is it? In other words, what strategies are there to ensure that it is put to its proper usage? Now, I've seen PDM, for example, has been given, let me see,
1.059
trillion.
Yes.
That's quite good money. I, for one, would appreciate that. This is good money. Because we understand that PDM is meant to uplift the status of the very ordinary Ugandan. That is prima facie on the face of it, the face value of this statement and this implication, and the cause for which this budget is given. But the question is that you and I have been Ugandans. We've seen past programs of the same kind. We've seen Emioga, we've seen the whatever. How important have they been?
That 1.90 trillion can give 1 million Ugandans each 1 million shillings.
Now, this is, for example, I do not know if anyone of you has thought about this. That we've had, you see, there is a proverb in English that kill not the goose that lays the golden egg. In other words, does the fact that we have these programs coming up quite often, program after program, does it imply that the goose we had has not laid any eggs? I do not know if any one of us has had that question. Or has it failed and that's why we need to replace it with another one? Because I do not want to think that this has always been a modification, but rather it has been initiation of a very complete and new program, but with almost similar dynamics. So honestly speaking, I am not very optimistic that this budget, for example, is going to be any important. Every one of you comes from what you call a village, although some of you are from not villages, but you want to term it as, so you only see one. But you've had claims of where this money has gone, and it has been, you know, the guidelines were that people were given a financial class were only supposed to get together, form a group, and access this money. But guess who were recruited on the different lists? It was always sons of Masawi, daughters to Ayebare, grandchildren to Laban, because Laban doesn't want to appear on the list. Recruits the son, you do the same. So at the end of the day, this money, the very people that are disbursing it are in charge of having it flow to the very last person, and the very people consuming it. So it's just that you have your face out of this, but you are the very beneficiary of that you intend to
benefit,
to transmit, or to benefit the very ordinary person. So if you do not address these loopholes, even if you gave this half of the total budget, then it's never going to yield.
Achieve.
So honestly speaking, in my personal opinion, without having to take so much time, I am not very optimistic that, well, it was important, but does it yield? Oh, will it yield? I have really no hopes. Because looking at past programs, for example, statistically, you people are good in statistics. You've had, reports of the past programs we've had, and you know what those programs are. Have you had a report, a very conclusive and detailed report of how effective they've been? How many people from the ordinary status have been uplifted to now a high-class status in terms of finances because of these initiatives? So it's always just a repeated cycle of give money, go get it. Give money, go eat it. So for me, I have my personal pessimism about this program.
All right.
Instead, I would think, because now, okay, we imagine that it's been put to use, and this person has, for example, uplifted their financial status. They've gone into production, they've had their matoke. But then if this person does not even have the roads to transport this matoke to the market, or if the costs of transport, given the road conditions, are even so high that they will not even register any profits, the question then is, has this program yielded any benefits? For me, I would think that this money would rather be invested so much in the service. You see, if you give citizens the necessary services that they need, if the people are in good health, if the roads are good, if the banks are functional, then people can always, they already need the very basics and the services, and not these handouts. Ugandans are drunk. You have people that get this money, and you have the person has made the inflation in the entire village because they had 1 million off this budget of PDM. So these handouts really have my personal.
Thank you.
When you ask on capitalization of UDB, I'm only requesting, you've seen success stories. Whom are they putting for money in UDBs? That you also get enticed. I really want my fellow young people to borrow money, even when they mishandle it. But let them know they will pay for loans where they also ate. We need government to get a day in the new vision and publish all these people who get loans from taxpayers' money in UDB, this capitalization. So that, for example, me and Masawi, government loans money. If I went and got a loan from government money, because I've seen Drake, Katpo, Laban are the people borrowing, and they are doing well. They are an inspiration, a success story. Let me also, but the biggest challenge has been the gap. Young people are even marginalized themselves from resources where they are supposed to be equally more responsible because they have a more repayment burden. The more you're younger, the more you'll be longer in the repayment before things stabilize. So let it not be on paper. Let government actually get a day and display all these people, because it is our right as Ugandans to demand, because they are using our money to loan them, so that I know the amount given who and who is getting. The way he does success stories is PDM. We want to know all these people that we capitalize for how much capitalization of UDB, so that Katpo knows that I can have accessibility to 300 million when I'm not a brother to someone in State House. Success stories are very few. Is why government is accusing most youth not to like it, that it has to bribe them to support. You inspire them by being realistic.
1.5 trillion.
Emma, are you a bribe?
I have told you 1.5 trillion shillings. You can give 1 million Ugandans each 1 million shillings. And that evening you will have done this country so great, because even if it is not me, but if I know a fellow Ugandan somewhere has received 1 million shillings.
You have received to do what? They don't just give people.
No, but Laban, this country, even if you had what to do money, there are those who receive without
you support the knowledge of saying they can just get 1 million and just give it to everyone.
No, what they are doing, what are they doing?
No, by the way, I am one of the people who believe in
Uganda, whether you receive it, you have to
in the PDM. I believe in it, and their success story I have seen. The problem is one. Actually, the problem is one. Is that the PDM, they make it political, but it is a very good initiative.
No,
by the way,
you see the question you need to answer now. That should be at the back of your mind. For example, we all believe in its script. It's just like I said in my most immediate. made a submission. Would you like it? But the question is, has it served its purpose? For example, on a scale of 10, how would you rank
I could give it 3.
Now we have ended.
Yes, I could give it.
If you give it free, why don't you want to give the other one who has it?
We don't be against it because it is good. But what we need to do
Is efficiency.
to make sure that the politics part of it. I'm happy that they have provided, I think, the bank charges because before these administrators, yes, government has provided it. Before, the administrators would what they would do, they would target these people in the villages who are getting the money from them. They say 100,000 are for bank charges. What they are lying to them? Are you getting? So, but now the government has gone ahead. Provided for the bank charges. But if they remove the politics of it to think that it is NRM this is not about NRM.
So Uganda.
For Ugandans.
Let's just something.
Also, Laban, to that extent, I think all of you, I would like to agree with you apart from Laban. You see, the problem is that even though we remove the politics, to what extent have you made these individuals ready to embrace that PDM funds? I'm going to give you an example. You say we all believe PDM is supposed to help in commercialization of agriculture, move away from subsistence to commercialization of agriculture, transformation. But how many people down there in the village are you going to give that money and they're not going to drink it, they're not going to pay dowry price, they're going to be able to.
Why do you also want them to die without receiving it?
You see,
why do you also want them to die?
The PDM is to increase the income of, not even commercialization of agriculture, to increase the income of the.
Laban, all Ugandans are equal. People can't do
the problem. Yeah, I do agree with you that sometimes the strategy on which we should get the money, because people, that is the issue.
All right, guys.
I do agree with you.
I understand it's a very hot discussion here. We need to go for a break. And thank you very much for sticking with us. And I know the conversation could go on and on and on this issue, but let's go for a break and then come back to discuss issues of geopolitics.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from the break. Just before we went into the break, it has been a heated discussion and a heated conversation on, of course, the youth perspectives on the 2025-2026 financial year, but also, of course, discussing the budget. And I just want us at this point to shift gears, because I know the conversation around the budget is endless, and there are a couple of views that cannot be captured in 1 hour, 2 hours. But let's shift gears, because the issue that is happening in Middle East right now between Israel and Iran is one that has caught the views or has caught the attention of the whole world. People are wondering, is it that time that we're going to see World War III? Is it that time that we should possibly start getting worried as Africa? Is it that time that we should be worried as Uganda? Denise, allow me to start with you. You are someone who has been in international forums, a couple of them. And also, of course, you're a proponent of peace and security. You have a very robust knowledge on that particular aspect. You know, a few days ago, I think it was on Friday night, where Israel attacked Iran, and Iran retaliated. And ever since then, it has been back and forth. And in Israel, we are seeing a couple of Israelis being told to go into the bunkers, and we're seeing the same also in Iran. But let us pick your thoughts. As a country, as Uganda, as East Africa, and as a continent, Do we need to be worried?
All right, thank you so much, Drake. But just for context and for the viewers to understand clearly where we're coming from and where we're going and whether we should be worried really. And probably as Genesis do a get ready with me as I go from my World War III.
Yeah.
I think, you see, the war between Iran and Israel has a long history, right from things like 1953, where a CIA-backed coup took place in Iran. And fast forward, in 1979 too, there was an overthrow of the US-backed government of Ayatollah.
But I think so that starts from 1948 when the state of Israel was established.
Exactly.
But I also think Uganda has an incentive because we would have been...
Yeah,
Israel
I mean that.
But
yeah, so in 1979, they overthrew that, right now the Islamic Republic regime, overthrew then the US-backed up government. And it's very important for context to understand that between 1953 and 1979, the regime that was there had strong ties with Israel. And in 1979, when the regime, the Islamic Republic regime came through, they were anti-Zionist, that's the first thing. They were against US-backed militarism within the Middle East. So they deliberately cut ties with Israel in terms of oil, in terms of security that existed by that time.
Yeah.
And ever since then, Iran has made its stance very clear that we are anti-Zionists, we do not support Zionism.
maybe for context,
And no Judaism.
what does anti-Zionism mean for the viewers who are possibly hearing these terms for the first time?
So I'm going to use a very simple term to explain this and to make sure that it is in due context.
Yeah.
And this has, of course, to go back to the Holocaust and all that time when we had Hitler. So for anti-Zionism, it means that these are individuals that are not against Zionism. And in the first place, it means that these individuals, because Jews within the Middle East were just put there, they were a state that was created for Palestine to accept. That's why they could place them in 1948 when the state of Israel was formed. So to that extent, these individuals being against Islam or anything, they were termed as Zionists. And you see, most of that is, there is Judaism and there is Zionism. And Iran has continuously made it clear that Jews support Judaism and all that, but then there is Zionism, which is mostly about Islam and all the Muslim Republic and all to that extent.
Radical Islam.
Yes, the radical Islam. So to that extent, Iran has already said, we're not against Judaism. We are against anti-Zionists, the ones that do not support, to that extent, Islam and the expansion of the Muslim states. So fast forward, in between 1953 and 1979, when all those ties were severed, to that extent, Israel continuously had wars in the Middle East. And I think also this begins with the Hezbollah. You have the Houthis that exist, you have Syria, you have Hamas. Iran has continuously supported these groups in proxy wars, even when they have not directly engaged with each other. And this speaks maybe between 1980 and the 1990s, when you had Iran support the Hezbollah in Lebanon, to an extent that they were able to chase out Israel in South Lebanon that had been there for the past 18 years. And you continuously have most of them supporting Iraq with the Houthis, or you have Hamas existing. So you have what happens to be the Axis powers, and then you have the US-backed powers, the Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, even when it is just quiet like that, but it is also part of them. And then you have Israel. So to that extent, all these individuals have been engaged in proxy wars, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it's proxy, whether it's warfare, or any of that. Now, fast forward, in 2005 also, you had Iran begin its nuclear development, even uranium and all that. US by that time warned Iran and said, to that extent, we do not expect you to develop any nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But Iran was very okay with submitting any of its nuclear development to the IUEA. It was very okay to the Joint Cooperation of Plan of Action to submit any of its progress to that extent. So everything that has been in development of the nuclear weapons within Iran, whether it's missiles or anything, have been submitted. And that is contrary to Israel, that refused to provide information about their nuclear development or even their progress or even where they're going to. And that makes it very questionable to an extent that Iran cannot have nukes. Why then does Israel supposedly have nukes? But then also you realize that this has continuously been escalated. They imposed sanctions, the US imposed sanctions on Iran for the past 2 decades. And to that extent, they were worsened in 2018 when Trump came into power. But this has not stopped Iran from developing any of its nuclear weapons or any of its missiles. It has continuously developed them, and it has continuously thrived. And this move has also pushed them to the new alliance, BRICS plus their existing powers. So it has stronger ties with Russia and China, and they even have a strategic plan that is signed for the next 25 years. So now, 2025. On June 13th, Israel carried out what it called a preemptive attack. And I need us to follow through this very, very easily, because in international relations, there are usually three attacks: a preemptive attack, preventive, and one which is just a response attack or an attack that has been created anew. Israel, on 13th June, attacked through nukes into Tehran and injured around 25 people in Iran. And they termed this as a preemptive attack because they believe that Iran becomes a threat now to the world, but then also to the Middle East. To that extent, the war escalated when Iran decided to respond to Israel's preemptive attack. And that has shown us different sides of the world, really. Because Israel has become a perpetuator of injustices within the Middle East, even when you look at the Gaza incident or the Palestinian war, where they've continuously bombed children and they want to erase it from the map. Which country accepted them to an extent that the whole world was against them? Then the second thing now is that to that point, why isn't Iran supposed to defend itself? Why is it supposed to just be attacked and there is no any defense mechanism to its own sovereignty? And here the question, the last thing I'm going to say before I go into how it interacts with East Africa or even Africans on a larger, broader scale, is that if we do not find a long-lasting solution to the Palestinian question, but then also a way for Iran to defend its sovereignty, then there is a way that this war could escalate. But even to an extent that the US right now is having fatigue, because the US has continuously involved itself in various wars during this Trump's administration, the few months he has been in power. You look at Taiwan, you look at Ukraine, you look at any of these Syria, any of these wars that they have continuously been through. This could potentially lead to his downfall, or it could escalate maybe the MAGA's failure, Make America Great Again, its failure because of the fatigue that they continuously have, or they could push it to a declining superpower even with very unpopular policies and executive orders that he has passed.
It could actually ruin his political career.
Exactly. Now, back to East Africa.
What is it pursuing anymore?
Back to Africa and East Africans. I think it's very important to know that the context of the Middle East, that's where most 20% of the oil or anything that is given within these countries is got from. Like, that's where we get most of our oil that gets to feed almost the entire world. And 20% of this oil comes from Iran itself. Not Saudi, not UAE or any of the other countries, but Iran. To an extent that we have an increase in oil prices, and I'm going to use when we had the Russia-Ukrainian war in 2022 when it had just begun. Remember, we had almost a liter of petrol at 3,500. To an extent it began, it skyrocketed to almost 6,000. And we are still facing those consequences to date, where you have maybe a liter of petrol at 5,000 or 4,090. And now that you have a war in the Middle East again, where most of the oil comes from, then to that extent, the oil prices increase. That's why you're going to go to a vendor maybe selling onions, and you ask for onions, and they tell you, hey, you did not hear of the Iran war, Iran-Israel war, even when they don't know anything about it. But you know how oil or fuel influences economies. Everything is based on transport. So if it's very expensive to transport my bag of onions from the village to the city, or it's very expensive for me to transport myself to one point to another, then the prices increase. You have an inflation existing within the economy. So that plays to the economics that Laban will talk about and all that. But then the second thing is that now we are at a point where we are having a polarized world, to an extent that these individuals, people who are more onto the US side, it's tending to become a declining superpower. And then I think that's why Trump is pursuing such protectionist policies, I would call them that, so that he doesn't end up maybe like the Ottoman Empire, or even how the British Empire has collapsed and you can no longer talk about it. So you now have new guys on block, I'll call them that.
The new kids on block.
Yes, China and Russia that have continuously known how to play their politics. And you see, this Israeli war, I saw something that showed that, it has made Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, he has made Hitler even look as a better individual compared to what people would expect or learn from history. So to that extent, I think there are three questions: sovereignty, and what exactly determines a preemptive attack? Because also Israel has nukes. So what exactly could go ahead and bomb a negotiation going on and decide to bomb Iranian scientists and expect no response, or expect now the world to stand with you, not to defend a certain country's sovereignty?
Okay. Kwesiga, just from where Denise ended on preemptive attacks, under international humanitarian law and also international law, there is a conversation around, there is what they term as preemptive attack, preemptive war. Preemptive attacks are justified under the law. Preemptive war is unjustified under the law. But let me give context to these two different scenarios. Preemptive attack is, in a scenario where it's justified, is where there is imminent danger. In a scenario whereby you see that a particular state is a threat to your sovereignty, then you go ahead and attack. In a preemptive war, you just go ahead and attack because you're swim. But also important to note, under preemptive attack, you need to be given a go-ahead by the United Nations. But of course, in reality, that is according to the law and according to the book. Now, fast forward, that is the two doctrines. We have the Bush doctrine that we saw in the year 2000, of course, from the backdrop of 9/11, when there was that serious bombing in the United States of America, which led to the Bush doctrine. The Bush doctrine, where we saw what happened in Iraq. They went and attacked Iraq because they wanted to, get rid of Osama bin Laden that they claimed was a threat to the sovereignty of the United States without any go-ahead from the United Nations. And they claimed to justify it because they brought them in front of the International Criminal Courts of Law, but they justified it using the Bush doctrine. Now, USA, in this point in history, they're helping Israel justify that claim to that extent. But let's pick your opinion on those two contrasting scenarios, but also how this affects East Africa as a community, but also Africa as a continent.
Thank you, Greg. Now, speaking to your very last question, I'll begin with that precisely. In my own opinion, Denise has really exhausted that question. And first of all, I do agree that has an effect on us as well. A proverb I like to say in regards to how people interrelate and coexist, and the same applies to nations. The Uganda proverb that what happens in the neighborhood ultimately does affect you. She spoke to a point of how much petrol comes from the Arab states. Now, in particular, it's what I think it is called the olive of homes, a particular tunnel through which much of the oil that we get is transported through. And definitely, and another point that we need to understand is that we are in a capitalistic world. And under capitalism, people do not only deal with reality, but also go speculating. That now, that war that has happened, we might not even feel the consequences same. It is even very true that we might never feel the consequences. Just saying. But that does not stop a capitalist who has been exporting, importing the oil to Uganda, to take advantage of that. To wake up today, you go to Shell and the price of fuel is 8,000. Simply because there is a justification and there is no way you'll prove him wrong. That's the price. And even when you do not know, when a person tells you there is a war going on, definitely you will know. And so that's justification enough. So, whether in real terms, whether in speculative terms, we do suffer consequences of anyone. Just don't be shocked. Should this sort of confrontations, not to call it, or should this confrontation go into the next 1 month, trust me, we shall feel that. And there is no, you'll justify that there has been no increment in importation prices of the paper. because that is happening, and so it's enough a capitalist to take advantage of you. And who suffers is the very ordinary border person who only needs 1 liter of petrol, upon which he can be able to get a profit of 2,000 from the transport of people he makes. So definitely we suffer the consequences. So that one I think is sorted. Then the question, your other question that has something to do with international humanitarian law. Now, under IHL, there is what we call the principles. It has principles of IHL. Now, some of the principles is necessity, but before I go into that, is that the core principle under IHL or its definition is that it is simply a law that guides parties in a confrontation or in a battlefield. We don't, because we have these international treaties, we have these bodies that govern us, upon which almost every country aligns, at least even at that regional level, you have African Union and sorts. So you do not simply wake up one day because you have your personal issue with the Rwandan government and go confront it simply because you are stronger. There is what we call rules of engagement. There are principles you are supposed to follow. Now, one of the principles is a necessity. Before we look at that, the preemptive attack, is that we need first of all to make assessment of the pre-existing factors. Are they sufficient to call for a preemptive attack? Yeah. And in my own opinion, I think it is a no. There is also what we call a distinction, that what you aim to do as parties at war is to weaken the party and not to kill them. Yeah. That's why under IHL, if you have your enemy who has surrendered, say cross sides and come to you, or you've surrounded them and they can't fight anymore and they are at amnesty, then you don't have to kill them. Because the major focus, the major principle that guides you is to weaken your opponent and not to kill. So now, still under distinction is that you must identify, because if Iran is at a confrontation or a war with Israel, it doesn't mean that every person in Israel has arms, for example, or is fighting Iran. There are particular places that are responsible for that, and there are particular people that are responsible. So my target, for example, I have no intention as to why I am at war with Rwanda, and then I am shooting rain in a village where I come from, and whichever villages you stay in. But I have all reasons as to why I should aim at blasting this here. I'm forgetting its name. Okay, name it the military bases upon which my rival is depending to make an attack. That's just the intention. But now I have a problem with the application and effectiveness of IHL when this is happening, and ideally would think that that all countries should come up and have one voice and condemn these atrocities. But then you have countries taking sides, for example, in support of the respective nations and not against the acts. The question then is, how sustainable is this? Where does it lead? Because one, it gives an impression that IHL is no more. It is only a document that, like usually
we studied books and
yes, you only have documents, but how, in fact, you people are on X, you've watched different media outlets. How many times have you seen any news reporter or political ideologue and analyst making reference to any of the principles of IHL or citing an article? It is just person's opinion and interests of the country against the other. So the point then is that we literally have no IHL. Now, for example, Israel is a non-NATO ally, if I'm not mistaken. Now, definitely, it qualifies to be a NATO member. If you are my ally, definitely I'll give you all the support you need. Now, also looking at the relationship that has been long-standing between Iran and Israel, you understand so well that Iran's alleged possession of nuclear weapons does not threaten Israel alone, but the rest of the superpower countries. I don't think, if you people have been keen enough, about 60 days back, prior to this attack that eventually happened, Trump had given a 60 days ultimatum to Iran. There is a document they wanted in line with the nuclear, upon which they were to append a signature and sign.
They were sitting in Oman.
So it is on the very end, on the 60th, I think 61st day, after the expiry of, in fact, the first day after the expiry of the 6 days ultimatum, that attack, the very first attack, did happen. So then, do you understand that it might not be very formal or formally said, but the USA is part of this? Because it is a superpower, and so if it's given you an ultimatum and you seem not to obey, which means you have a big head, you are big-headed, you are threatening its hegemony, and so it has to take decisive action through you. But because it doesn't want to appear in a party relationship of USA and the USA against Iran, then it will have to go through the so-called ally, who is now a close associate. So it's for me it's a conflict that involves almost every other big powers of the nation of the world. Because what is NATO, for example? If we are if you and I formed a company and I hold 90% of the shares, definitely I have veto powers. My voice will sound more than anyone else. Now, looking at NATO, what is NATO? NATO is simply USA and its allies. So at the sound of a US president or US interest, then NATO collectively ceases to have any implications. So for me, there is a big issue, and this the reference to IHL to me doesn't really make sense. It only makes sense in a point where a superior power is intending to exercise its supremacy over a weaker party. But where a powerful country like US has interest, then these documents are just mere documents like the DAB is. So
Okay. Yeah, Denise.
Just where you say that on the 61st day, it's where they likely had a response to Iran. I think even on that day, that's where you had the 13 scientists and also the negotiator existing to establish what next that should be done. And I give a very good context that you also know about, that previously and the previous decades, Iran has always adhered with any of the protocols of having any nukes that exist. So to that extent, I do not find it very justified for a country that has continuously bombed children, civilians, for the past 2 years to have any justification on how they had a response or a preemptive attack on Iran. And I think also this brings out how inefficient the Iron Dome of Israel is, or the high tech that we all thought that Israel possessed, to that extent how inefficient it is. So I have failed, as a personal opinion, to have any justification on why Israel had to carry out that preemptive attack, yet it has continuously failed to adhere with any of the nuclear development weapons acts or any of its actions.
International instruments, yes.
Yeah, international instruments.
Interesting. Ivan, let me get to you, then I come to Laban to sum up the economics here. For the local Ugandan, who is a Christian, they know that the Israel that is referred to is the one in the Bible. And my question to you in line of that is going to stem from that particular mindset that Christians possess, because we have media that is, of course, the traditional and non-traditional. People have various opinions and they're misleading people in any direction. But of course, we are in an age of information. That being the case, Israel has a historical connotation to its existence. And they have, of course, with history itself, or claiming to have existed for over 2,000 years and plus. And cognizant to that fact, to that Christian out there who is a Ugandan and they're arguing, oh, these are Israelites, and they would say, oh, they are carrying out the acts of God. Should therefore Israel, because of its historical connotations, is it justified, or is it at an advantage to justify its actions?
Drake, you paint a very I want you to move to Tel Aviv and see if you find people crying in night in churches like what they did. If you find them preaching on the street, or you will find any Christian with a Bible. Get time, go to Tel Aviv and visit that. Let me give my views of Israel. War, naturally, is not something good. War has ideological and non-ideological. Ideological is based on purpose and mission. And ideological is based on ego and superiorism. To prove fighting is good, but war is bad. When I was a little boy in primary, one time I was in FIFA, a P7 kid slapped me. slapped me, I slapped back. He then slapped me more badly. I got angry. I picked a brick to beat him. As I picked a brick, the teacher came running and caught me, stopped me from stoning back. And if I had not picked a brick, the teacher was not willing to intervene because he was feeling lazy to intervene the way because it was looking small. Until I scared to return back with a more. So is why I will encourage Iran to fight back. The more it fights back, the more it will pull the entire globe to say, let's sit down. Because so anyone, as long as you are under attack, you have a natural responsibility of life to fight back. The West has given Israel too much supremacy over its behaviors. Even when Yasser Arafat was heading the Palestinians before he perished in that assassination that they believe he died of a blood clot, the Palestinians all years were suffering at the expense of the West. They always have this thing, Israel is ours. So people have died all in issues of an ideological of partnering, an ideological of just showing supremacy. It has become so an ideological that I want to control what you should innovate and grow in. If you're growing past the speed I don't like, I'll come with tariffs, I'll come with what, and disorganize you. You want to limit my potential for existence because you feel for your superpower I should not be. I congratulate China on the economics it has won. It now has to deal with security. As long as we remain with these ideological global wars, I think where should Uganda and Africa go into? Let's leave that stupidity of Christianity. You go to Tel Aviv, you will not find street pastors. You go to Jerusalem, you will not find any person crying the entire night making noise. That what? That is where they are telling you. You'll actually find people wearing different from what you think a Christian is. You'll think it is an Islamic state in the biggest part of Israel. The dress code is for more Islam than even Christian. So all those identities, those which are an ideological are formed around identity, which is very dangerous. So when I saw the foreign minister of Iran, that is Abbas Ariat, he was here in Uganda for some time, at least most Ugandans are familiar with him, come up to say that they are willing to fight back until Israel stops fighting it back. That is what they should take. If we continue to accept to sideline with people who want to create mediocrity in others, that we regulate you. I love the Trump's approach that you don't go direct, you remain with your card as if you're putting it on Ukraine, as if you're still talking to Trump. People should manage to avoid war because they know that war, everybody is a casualty. As Africa and Uganda coming, because in the interest of time, I think my request should be how best do we organize ourselves that we mitigate the outcomes of such wars which are external on our economies. How best do we now look into our own sustainable issues here, that when a war happens in Ukraine and Russia, the issues of energy, we can control our energy supply here. The issues of when US cuts aid, we can innovatively address issues of our gap holes. Is why I get disturbed by our African leaders. They have large intestines, their appetite is too high, their expenditure is very bad, they are extravagant, they all want chest pump, show I'm the strongest man. They live in lie, they hire support, they don't build ideological existence for their survival. You find one leader relies on buying support to exist as a very great man, but when they are not solving the issues of foundation, pillars that hold Africa from independence. So, my request is that as Africa, we should actually be more worried on how best do we work on sustaining ourselves to mitigate the factors that may befall us as a result of the Israel, Palestine, Israel, Iran, Israel, and even Ukraine, Russia. Because as we are here, other people, you see German and the likes, they are also having their internal misunderstandings that can also outrage a war.
Yeah.
But as a Uganda, how best are we working on our issues, especially economy, like Laban is going to, that we seek sustainability and resilience from always, they have begun fighting, wheat is going to become expensive. They have begun fighting. Let's now begin going to buy bicycles. We may not afford fuel. They have begun fighting. The cost of chips is going to be affected. If China and Taiwan are in a fight, iPhones are going to become more expensive. We need to look into mitigating factors and leave issues where we cannot control. You can't go there and control as an African, yet you still have issues of jiggers, open defecation, what? Hunger, malaria. Who are you?
Let me assault you there. Laban, as we sum up, the conversation now is on the economics. He has made a very humorous statement.
It should first withdraw the first withdraw those reckless statement of
Anyway, Laban, let's
Masawi should first withdraw those statements.
let us get
You can't talk of drones when you have no toilets.
First of all, I want to sympathize and understand the solidarity with the Ugandans in Tel Aviv, in the towns of Jerusalem, and the rest. You know, we have young people in Israel that are mostly doing the training in agriculture. You know, Israel does a lot of work, partnership with Uganda.
Just to also point out, in Iran we have some in the oil sector that are there.
Yeah, for Iran, I'm not sure. I am so much sure about Uganda. Mostly our Makerere students that usually go every year for those trainings. They spend almost close to 1 year. They are there. I can imagine the situation they are passing through. Actually, even one of my former roommate that I used to be with at Makerere, they went to Israel for that training and never returned. He had to think for asylum, maybe because of the governments of Masawi here, which are keeping us poor. He decided not to return, to remain there. So I want to sympathize with them and pray for them in this hard time. I will be brief. I think these comrades have tried to exhaust a lot. But maybe I will go into the briefly in economics. How does the war affect us, the Africans, and particularly Uganda? You know, we have enjoyed relationship with the two countries, Iran and Israel. But for a long period of time, I think we have had a long-standing relationship with Israel. Mostly Israel has supported Uganda largely in terms of agriculture. Because we get not only the skills, but also most of the fertilizers that you see that they use in the African continent come from Israel. So it is going to be difficult in terms of food security in Uganda and Africa at large.
And the conversation was talking about we need to come up with mitigation measures.
Yes, that's why we have to look at such. How do we start developing our own fertilizers in Uganda to reduce the dependence on that in such circumstances? We have also to look at the global supply chain, how it is going to be affected. Because you know there are some imports that pass through the Suez Canal that joins that. And when you look at Israel and Iran, I think they are near close each other. Because I think it is like 2.5 hours between them, the transport time that it takes. So you have to look at the transit cost that is going to. But also you have to look at the trade between, because whether Israel is so much into European, because now they do their things as they are part of European. When you see even football, they do European football, that's why they participate. But you have to look at, initially they are like part of Asia. And you have to look at what is the trade between African continent and Asia. I last read the report, it was standing at 32%, the largest. Even actually, it is more than Africa themselves. Africa stands at around 18%. The trade amongst the Africa themselves. But the trade between Africa and starts at beyond
Chinese
32.
products have.
But look also at the trade between Uganda and Europe. Stand at around 29. So it is going to be affected. The prices of oil and everything are going to. So we must prepare for the worst. That's why I've been a strong advocate for the East African market, but also the African Continental Free Trade Area. That how do we make sure that we support ourselves? We support these initiatives of the Africa to make sure that in terms of these wars, how do we make sure that we use our own market to support ourselves? That is something that we have to look at.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Just one word. Just make your concluding remarks, statement, and all the panelists, then we sign out.
In conclusion, one, I want to call upon the young people in Uganda. We are near. You never know, maybe this year it may be by last. This may be by last to be happening here. So I want to use this opportunity to call upon the young people. One, to participate in the election. To participate in the election. Let the young people who are eligible to go between 18 and 30 to go for the National Youth Council elections that are starting very soon tomorrow. Of course, those who have not been nominated will not get any chance. But for those who have not, continue from village to parish, from parish to sub-county, from sub-county to district to the national. I know there is a lot of going on, the RDCs in how they intervene with the process. Whatever the rest, let's keep pushing.
Let's get it
but
involved.
also I want to advocate for the young people to participate in the peaceful elections. Let's not go violence because we have a life, we have a future. Those ones what we are fighting for, they are in the 80s, 70s. They have eaten what they have eaten, they are going. We should not worry not. The transition is coming.
All right. Denise.
All right, just two things. The first one is that on the budget talk, I think as young people we need to understand and be interested in things that affect us to that extent and not just headlines. Let's not just have recycled headlines in our heads, but understand to what extent the budget is going to affect us, but also know where the opportunities are so that we can leverage on them. But then also on geopolitics, it is just important that we get to understand how also this affects us because we're in a globalized world. We are in one village where a problem in another country could be a problem to me the next day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Emmanuel.
Thank you, Drake. First and foremost, thank you for hosting us. But in my very conclusive remarks, is that for me, I would think that war is synonymous with destruction. And destruction is inclusive of loss of property and lives. And honestly speaking, if I were to refer to the writings of Martin Rees in his book, the final, it's called Our Final Century, he does state that years back, human beings lived in an existential scare or threat because simply of the prevailing natural conditions then. These included the weather, these included the severe drought in certain countries, thunderstorms, hailstorms, landslides, and the likes. But he does mention that today, all that we live in fear of is our own making. Because what are we scared of? We are afraid. For example, right now, we are afraid that Iran could be no more the following morning. Why? Simply because a human being is behind it. Simply because another country is behind it. So, honestly speaking, we are scared to ourselves. And so for me, war should not be justification for anything. There are better alternatives. There are better alternatives including dialogue. But even looking at our own country, Uganda, dialogue has failed. At the end of the day, we have physical confrontations, and that's never a good thing. It is that grows even to a broader scale, and we have these inter-country attacks upon which we all take sides. And this is it's very absurd. We would rather compete in technology, we would rather compete in production and other things of proving supremacy over lost lives of your own citizens. I think this is quite absurd. And now we cannot influence things that we have no knowledge about. So I would implore every other viewer, especially the young people, to be alive to this fact, to be alive to this matters that happen at a geopolitical level, that happen internationally. It's only then that we can be able to have informed decisions and rise up for the better. Thank you so much for hosting us
Thank
today,
you.
and always it's been nice.
Thank you.
I do extend my appreciation to you, Drake, in person, and my fellow panelists, especially my senior Laban and our international diplomat, plus my brother Emmanuel. Robin Sharma, in one of his books, A Leader Without Any Title, clearly states that turbulent times produce strong leaders. Basically, to the young people outside there, I know you feel marginalized by issues of how the youth leadership has been curtailed by money, by families, by the state. But I want to argue on this Thursday is the voting for the youth committees at structures at the village level. Go and participate, go and express your voice through that individual youth. You want to see that you get a leadership of your own time as a generation, to be a person who takes your civic responsibility and contribution towards the Uganda you want to see. With that, I want to thank Center for Constitutional Governance, Civic Space TV, and our production team for giving us a great time. Thank you.
Thank you. You have done my job. You already signed up for us. I'll just say thank you very much for always watching, and of course, subscribe, follow us on our X handles, that is at Civic Space TV, and also at Center for Constitutional Governance. But also do like and subscribe to the show. Make your comments. We shall definitely do, of course, keep the conversation going. Otherwise, my name is Douglas Onen. See you same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.